Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to my favourite books of 2020 list. I'm filming this in November, so this is my favourites from January to November. If I read anything in December, I'll talk about it in a reading vlog, so please check those out. I'll post them obviously at a later date on this channel, but as for this year, as for 2020, these are my top favourite books. Some of them are contemporary books and some of them are fantasy, so let's jump into my list and we'll start with a contemporary. I actually already have a review for this one and I have a review for the one coming after this one as well, so I'll link everything I talk about down below in the description so it's all easy to find. But the first book that I really loved is Only Mostly Devastated. This is an Australian release, but it tells the story of like a Grease musical retelling, and it follows our main character Ollie. He's 18 and his family have just uprooted him and moved to a new state, and they've moved because one of the family members that is not a direct family member, it's more like an aunt, she has come down with cancer, and so she's got some young kids. Ollie is like a babysitter to these kids while his parents support her going through chemo and stuff. So it's got a realistic family aspect to the backdrop of this love story. So while it investigates Ollie and his relationship with this guy named Will and how they kind of fell in love over the summer and they were comfortably queer with each other and it was lovely, they went back to school and Ollie's just started at this new school and he realizes that Will isn't out yet at the school and Will treats him like kind of a jerk. And Ollie also makes friends with this group of girls, and in his first conversation, like an icebreaker conversation with them, he talks about his summer romance and he realizes that he just outed Will by accident to Will's friends. So it doesn't go down the road of negativity, it goes down the road of support and friendship and coming out stories, but in a very positive way. And I think that's one of the main reasons that I absolutely loved this book. And I went into it assuming that it would be told in like a younger kind of style format, which very much suits YA, and I'm very aware that I'm a 27-year-old reading YA, so that might be a part that is just on me personally that I don't connect to a YA because of that reason, but it didn't really play into this whatsoever. I very much related to Ollie. I understood his struggles and his decisions based on who he was and what age he was. So I think as a collective, this book did everything really well. It was very well balanced and I just have major love for this book and I can't wait to revisit it because it was just so fun. It handles everything, like I said, very supportively, and even though I haven't read this in a couple of months now, so some of the stuff has kind of fallen out of my head because I read a lot during the year, I do remember the way this made me feel, so that is why it is first on this list. Next on this list, again I have a review for it, is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This was a book that is very overhyped and a lot of people talk about it on YouTube specifically, but also on Twitter and Instagram. And so when I was going into it, I was very hesitant and I was hoping that my expectations and the way that this book delivered would align, and it absolutely did. So this, if you didn't know, follows Addie and she is 300 years old. So we get two timelines. The first is when she's in 1700s France, and then the second is when she's in 2014 New York. So when she's in France, the premise of this story is that gods exist and you can pray to them, but you shouldn't pray to the gods after dark. But Addie goes and prays to the gods after dark kind of by accident because she wants to escape this arranged marriage and she just wants to be free, basically. But the god she prays to doesn't necessarily see it that way and he kind of twists her deal. And so he ends up granting her immortality, but as a result of this immortality that grants her so much freedom, she has a curse put upon her as well by him because he trades in souls, and if he's granted her immortality, then he's not really going to get her soul anytime soon. So that curse is that nobody remembers her, she can't say her name, and a whole host of other things that are attached to that premise. And you get to learn about that at the beginning of the book, so that's all I want to say about it. But I loved this so much, and the way that this did the world building in terms of Addie's curse at the start, any questions I had were very much answered in the way that Addie went about her life and went about figuring out the boundaries of this curse. And so from that point onwards, it kind of left my questions answered. So I could go into the rest of the book just really invested in Addie and really invested in the characters that she encounters. And when one day she's in 2014, she runs into this boy named Henry in a bookstore, and for some reason Henry remembers her. So This girl who is 300 years old is remembered by nobody, is suddenly remembered by one person, and she doesn't know why, and neither does the reader, which is great. I adored the relationships in this book, and I'm not usually a person who reads a book and loves a romance at the center, but I think because Addie really needed meaning in her life, and she needed recognition, and she needed continuations rather than just beginnings, I loved the way that this explored those themes, and that's why it's one of my favorite books of all time. When I read this, I got it early, and I didn't have anybody to scream about it with because nobody had read it yet. So now that it's out, I'm so happy that I can scream along with everybody else who has read this, because it has quickly become my favorite book of this year. I say that with a bit of trepidation because I did read a Brandon Sanderson book this year, and he's my favorite author, but if he didn't put any books out this year, this would absolutely be my favorite of 2020. Next is a fairly recent read for me, and it's one that I didn't expect to love, and it is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This is the second volume because I gave this one 5 stars, and I've given the first one 4, and then the third one 4.5, and then the fourth volume comes out in 2021, and I have definitely pre-ordered this because I am loving this series so far. But Heartstopper follows 2 boys and their budding love story. Charlie is our main character, Nick is his love interest, and the way that this starts is everybody knows that Charlie is gay because somebody outed him at his school, and he has gone through rigorous bullying since, but he seems to be kind of balancing himself out now in terms of his identity, and he seems like just a very shy individual, and he ends up meeting Nick, and Nick seems like he's this very pretty straight boy, and Charlie is developing this crush on him, and so this crush is treated in a very wholesome way, and I love the way that narratives of queer teenagers were explored in this. I'm being very careful so that I don't spoil this story because it's so short in each volume, and the art is so simplistic but so emotive, and this book made me tear up and it made me laugh as well, and that's why I want to put it on this list. But to tell you the reasons that it made me tear up and it made me laugh are spoilers, so I don't want to spoil this series because, like I said, it's short, but it's so sweet and so wholesome, and it's so healthy in the way that it shows communication and relationships and friendships, and that is one of the reasons that it's on this list, because I have just fallen head over heels for this. And the reason that I kind of put this off before, I think I'm a bit of an art snob. I look at books like Saga, for example, and I love the color palette of Saga. I love the detail of Saga, and I love more detailed graphic novels. When it comes to this, it has quite simplistic drawings in it. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to love this, but so many people hype it up and I don't know why. Now I completely understand why. It's because it is so fluffy and cute, and the characterization is wonderful, and the setting is just peak high school, basically, but in a way that it conveys friendships and support in such a healthy way, while also delving into the negativity of certain things, but not in a way that romanticizes or glorifies it. So it's realistic, but it's also wholesome, and I love that it walks that line. So the next book that I'm going to talk about on this list is also contemporary, but it's the last contemporary on this list, and I know my channel is very much like fantasy focused with a bit of sci-fi and not very much contemporary, so this list is probably a little bit of a surprise to people, but It Sounded Better in My Head by Nina Kenwood. I read this at the beginning of the year for the Contemporary-a-thon readathon, which is where you read, obviously, contemporary books. This has been on my to be read pile for a little while, and because it's so bright and sunny and yellow, I was expecting it to be fun and fluffy, and it absolutely was. So it follows Natalie, and she's just past her high school years. So she's about 18, but in Australia, high school ends when you're 18, and then you go off to uni if you choose to do so when you're, 18 to turning 19. And so in between, there's this weird kind of gap of like 4 or 5 months where you've finished your exams for high school and you're waiting on the university year to start in March. So that's about from November-ish to March. So we're in the summer in Australia. She's just finished her exams and she's kind of trying to navigate her relationships because she's a very anxious person, and I love the way that anxiety was explored in here. And she gets herself into like this romantic situation but doesn't really know how to handle it, and has conversations about that. There's also there's only one bed trope in here, which was done in such a wholesome and cute and fluffy way that sparked so much sexual tension, and it was just so cute. And it didn't go sexually explicit, it went more emotive and cute and fluffy. So if you're not someone who likes sexually explicit books, this would be a romance that I think you would really, really enjoy, because it could have gone down that road of girl on girl hate, and I hate that trope to develop characters. It seems fairly lazy to me. While it does and can exist, people hate each other all the time. I just don't like it perpetuated in fiction because there's an avenue that you can explore that doesn't involve people hating on each other, and you can make your characters more nuanced, and that definitely was evident in this book, and I really respected it for that. And I also just love the way that the story was told, and I love the friendships, and I love how communicative everybody was. It was just, again, like Only Mostly Devastated, I understood the characters and their decisions and their outlooks on life, even though they were younger than me. I didn't think that I would love this as much as I did, but it was a pleasant surprise. So as someone who doesn't usually read contemporary, I think more readers of fantasy might like this as well. Okay, so now we are delving more into fantasy, and the first book that I read in 2020 was a 5 out of 5 stars for me. So I started out this year strong, and it's a Joe Abercrombie book, and it's A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. This is the first book in his Age of Madness series. It's a continuation also of his first law books. But if you watch an interview with him on Murphy's channel, and I'll link it below if I remember, he said in that interview that you can technically kind of start anywhere with his books, because he wrote a bunch of standalones, he wrote a trilogy, and then he's written this new series. So depending on when you jump in, there will be different characters that you experience. But if you start from the beginning and read all the way through like I did, you will notice recurring characters, recurring themes, and then recurring conversations, not in a repetitive sense, just in a way that fleshes out the world more. So if you start this without reading his first law books, chances are you'll probably miss a few things. If you want to start with this series, you 100% can. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So this is a really hard book to describe. I'm going to give it a try though. I can't say surnames either, otherwise it will be spoilers. So I'm just going to go with the first names of these characters. So the main kind of two that we are focusing on, even though there are a bunch of different characters in here, are Leo and Savine. And Savine is a politician. She's very high up. This is like the beginning of an industrial revolution. And so she's got a lot of stakes in industry in terms of like shares and owning warehouses and that kind of thing. So she's very wealthy. She's extremely wealthy. There is, like I said, the beginning of an industrial revolution. So the slums are starting to boil with rage. And again, a little hatred. You can assume that people aren't happy. We've also got Leo, who is trying to win in battle. He's very much a soldier. But I read him as like an excitable puppy that is dressed up in battle armor. And so he starts out more devil may care. He doesn't really notice much about politics in the world, but obviously these characters go through a lot of trials. And so he gets hardened depending on the narrative. There's also a prince in here named Prince Orso, and he very much specializes in disappointments. So you see him from a political standpoint trying to develop himself as well. And he comes up against a lot of backlash and a lot of interesting scenarios. He's got a specific tie to Savine as well, and I liked their relationship dynamic. It's so hard to talk about this without giving accidental spoilers, because the sequel to this also came out this year, and I read that recently too. And I actually talked about that in a vlog, but also spoiler free. So it's really hard to discuss this without blending my mind with the sequel. So all you need to know about this is that Joe Abercrombie writes in such a way that is informed by character. And so I might not necessarily remember specific politic angles from this book, but as soon as I listen to the audiobook, as soon as I pick it up again, I am absolutely back inside the characters' heads that he's writing from, because the language he uses is very much aligned with where the character is situated in hierarchy in politics. The battle scenes that he writes are very easy to imagine, and they're very clear and visual to me. And the tone that his writing is in as well, just it conveys so much. So if you haven't read Joe Abercrombie, you're missing out on brilliant character development and growth and description. And I am really thoroughly enjoying the audiobooks that is for this series as well. So Stephen Pacey does those, and he varies his voice for all of the characters that we read from. So if you haven't listened to these on audiobook and you want to start Joe Abercrombie, either start with this one like I didn't, but you could, or start with The Blade itself, which is the first book in the first Law trilogy. Every time a new book is released by him, I get the audiobook before I get the physical book. And this wouldn't be a video by me if I didn't mention the Dresden Files, because that is an urban fantasy series following wizard detective Harry Dresden, and he investigates crimes with the police as like a consultant. It starts out again, like I said, as formulaic in a bunch of other videos that I've made, but it continues on to really develop the characters, because Jim Butcher wrote the first book, Stormfront, as like a challenge to his professor. He wanted to prove her wrong, and he wrote all of the stereotypes and archetypes that you would expect in an urban fantasy, And then she turned around and said, yeah, this will sell. And so now he's made a series about it. But the way that he wrote the first 2 books, you can tell he's very green to the series. And from the 3rd book onwards, he really starts to develop what he's initially set up. So it becomes less stereotypical and more nuanced later on. That said, I still really enjoyed the first 2 books, but I wanted to spotlight a couple of books in this series so far that I've given 5 stars and that I have absolutely adored. And I did a spoiler talk with my partner, so I'll link that down below as well. But we talk about books 1 to 8 in that video. So if you haven't read up to that point in the Dresden Files and you're planning on reading it, don't watch that video because it is full of spoilers. However, I'm going to talk spoiler-free in this video, so please stick around. The books that I loved in this series are these ones. So we've got Proven Guilty, we've got Deadbeat, and we've got Grave Peril. These are books that I've given 5 stars to. So I believe this is book 3, this is book 7, and this is book 8. No, this might be book 6. Either way, loved these so much. I love the development of Dresden. I love the magic that is being developed, and I love that there are nuance of all of the supernatural creatures that get introduced. If I talk about these, I'm going to talk in circles because I don't want to obviously spoil anything, and I love these so much and I could just rave about them forever. So if you want to start the Dresden Files, give them a try. I know that they're not for everybody, and I know that people have said that there is a male gaze issue, and I very much see where people are coming from. And while it's something that I noticed and kind of like scoffed or rolled my eyes at certain points, it's something that doesn't become as strong later in the books. It's like Jim Butcher realized that he was doing it, and then he's made Dresden self-aware and reject situations like that. But Dresden is also a single male in his late 30s or in his 30s, and so it's also told from a first-person perspective. So I think that narrative to a certain extent also fits Dresden, but I talked about this in a better, more detailed way in my review of the 4th book. So if you want to go and look at that, I'll link it below as well. But I love this series so much. I love Dresden. I love the audiobooks. Again, they're done by James Masters. So if you haven't tried these yet and you like audiobooks, would recommend. Very excited about the Dresden Files. If you haven't read them, please do, because they're so much fun. And then if you know me, you probably know what the last book on this list is going to be, and that is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. I've done a spoiler-free review and a spoiler vlog for this entire book. This is the 4th book in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. If you weren't aware, Brandon writes these books in the Cosmere, and the Cosmere is his universe, but each book, so each world is on a different planet, and those planets exist in the same universe. And sometimes there are characters who are world hoppers, and so they appear in each book, but you don't necessarily need to understand the significance of them in order to understand the story. And I love the way that the Cosmere was developed a little bit more in this book. Like, we get a few more crumbs of this. But if you haven't read Way of Kings, again, I'll link a review below. I sound like a broken record. The Way of Kings follows three main characters, Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. And at the beginning of the book, there's like 2 beginnings. So the first one is about 6,000 years ago, and we see the heralds, and they are just abandoning one of the heralds in desolation so that he can hold off the next coming apocalypse, because every time they go back into desolation, they are tortured endlessly until the next apocalypse comes, and then they come out of desolation to help fight against the monsters and then end the desolation. So this is a fantasy book that is fighting an apocalypse, essentially, is the rough premise. And then the second start is Seth, and he is the assassin in white, and he is about to murder the king. So after that happens, you flash forward 6 years, and now we are with Kaladin, Dalinar, and Shallan. Kaladin is a spearman, but he's also trained as a surgeon, and so you've got that dichotomy of he's been trained to heal, but he also has to go off to war to kill people. We've got Shallan, who is a young woman, and she is going off to become an apprentice to the scholar Yasna, and she's going to apprentice to Yasna because she loves scholarly information, she loves study, she's also an artist, but she's doing this scholarly endeavor in order to get close to Yasna, because Yasna has something that Shallan needs for her family. So that is Shallan, and she's got to balance what she loves doing with the responsibility that she feels towards her family. And then we've also got Dalinar. So the king at the beginning is Gavilar, and Dalinar is his brother. So we follow somebody who is high up in politics as well, and Dalinar very much has to help manage the politics at the edge of this Shattered Plains area, which is where the war keeps taking place as mini battles. Oh, this book is so complicated, but it is so good. And Dalinar gets visions every now and then because there is a storm that sweeps through every couple of weeks called the High Storm, and that brings with it investment of magic, and that rejuvenates the stormlight in the gemstones. And the stormlight is very much the magic system that exists in this world. And you get to learn that and see it used in the way that Seth kills the king, because he uses stormlight. So you get like tastes of each aspect of the world building and the characterization from the beginning, and then after that you settle in for the long haul and you see these characters develop. It's safe to say I gave this 5 stars. That is why it's in this video. I could rave on and on about this forever, the same way I could rave on about all of the other books in here. But if you want to read The Way of Kings, if you want to read Stormlight, I would highly encourage you to. However, if you haven't read Warbreaker yet by Brandon Sanderson, that is one of his Cosmere books, and some of the elements of Warbreaker start to play into this series in general. So there are some Easter eggs, but you can read this series without reading Warbreaker first. But if you do read Warbreaker first, you will probably pick up on those Easter eggs, and it will make this world and the Cosmere seem more advanced to you. So my recommendation is to read Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Warbreaker, Oathbringer, and then Rhythm of War. That is my recommendation. Enjoy your reading. Let me know if you read Brandon Sanderson, but that is all for this favorites video of 2020. Thank you so much for watching. I will chat to you in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.